Hi, everyone. Welcome to the quarterly meeting of front-end group sessions where we're going to be addressing the topic of availability in lovable stages, which I should say it's more correct to say lovable product categories. And we do have a couple. So as you look on the product category maturity board, code review or source code, and verify are the stages where they live. So that's why we're all here together. We are looking to learn from each other, and we're going to have an open discussion about this. We have 5 sections. The floor is open for discussion. As you want to say something, just put your point in the bullet points. We'll do our best to cover for each other, taking notes. So please try to do that. And yeah, so the big question here is how to deal with availability and ensuring availability while maintaining a good velocity in shipping work to our customers. So
can I interrupt real fast?
Yes, you can, Sarah.
I don't have edit access to the document. I don't know if other people do, but I can't help add notes.
You know,
Same.
That would explain why nobody has added anything. I apologize, and I would ask you all to please reload, and everything should be okay. Loving the ASCII art. All right, so now that everybody has, can someone confirm you have access? You can edit, type something. There we go. I see a colon. All right, so there is access. So can we go on? Thanks, Tomasz. There's a link to maturity board in case you want to see. So the first section, I'm going to dedicate a couple of minutes to it. Is basically just defining availability, and we do have the definition. So I'm going to be reading the definition so that we can all see. Issues with availability label directly impacts the availability of gitlab.com SaaS solution. It is considered as another category of a bug. So basically is making things available, making sure that the features are features that customers use are available and don't stop working all of a sudden. But what else does it mean to you? What can you say to expand on that on a daily basis? How do you feel about it? How does that make you feel? Anybody has any thoughts?
I would say for me, one of the things that I've always tried to keep in mind is that new work should never impair older work. So whatever I'm adding to the code base shouldn't influence the previous feature we're already working for our users. And for me, that's also availability.
Thanks, Frederick.
Yeah, I agree. I think about it a lot in terms of, oh wait, where's my note? I'm sorry, I started to say something. Yeah, for me, it's sort of like availability isn't just that things aren't broken for our users, it's all of the things that we do to keep them unbroken. So I have a lot to say in sort of a later section about all of the different ways and things that we're doing to keep them unbroken, but that like, it can't just be this like tenuous thing. Like really good availability is like a whole full system that makes it easy to make things available.
That's a great point, Sarah. Thank you. Anyone else has anything to add? I can add my perspective as you're thinking. It might not be as a straight up availability on the perspective that the users will see the features working, but I've grown to feel like even the minor or the smallest minute visual regression or misalignment, they also tie in with availability. Not that the feature is not available to them, but in our stage, I feel like the impact is kind of the same. If you have misaligned icons, it starts to become the nuisance. But if it's something that, you know what, those very heavily used paths, and you always bump into the same annoyance, it starts to become pain. So I feel like at times, visual misalignment take the importance of availability. So that's one of the things I felt over the past couple of months working in a Lovable category is that visual nuisances, albeit small, do translate into pain and represent availability too. I know might be contested by some. Any more thoughts?
I'd like to add on that, because I think that's a very good point. I used to be a QA engineer back in the days. And one thing that we would do is that we would have something called a RICE score, which is a concept of when you're assigning a weight to an issue, you don't just take into account how badly it impacts the feature, but also how often and for how many of your user, right? So like, I think that ties into this idea that it's not because it's a small issue that it's not important. It might even be more important. Sometimes a misalignment, if it's seen by everyone and it's seen all the time, is worse than like one user having to reload their page once. And that can like tie into availability. And we can see it sometimes like in the pipeline graph with misalignment, we get like dozens of comments, whereas a completely broken page might not even get an eye, like someone raising an eyebrow. So it really depends.
So if a website stops using in the woods and no one is there to use it, is it really broken?
Exactly.
Cool.
We have a poet in our midst.
Define rice for us real quick.
Yeah, well, it's rice.
Oh, you already linked to it. Nice.
Yes, Sam did. Amazing. Cool.
Googled it. I have no idea what it is.
Is that correct, Frederick? Is that the right rice?
Yeah, exactly. Reach, impact, confidence, and effort. Right.
We do have some of that factored into the severity, by the way. If you look into the severity table, it does have, let me just check. We used to have, give me 1 second. Maybe we don't. The size of the crowd, the impact that it had. I can't find it. Anyway, we used to have something that mentioned how big of a crowd is being affected by this. And I can't really find that in our triage. But anyway.
In the table is showing impacts 50% or more users, impacts 25% or more users, so on.
Right. Give me just 1 second. 1 second. 1 second. I just want to make sure that I have my screen ready for sharing. There it is. So impacts 50% or more of our users, impacts 25% or 50% of our users, 25% of our users, and less than 5%. So these is where all the IE11 bugs went to live before we dropped support. But we got rid of that. Cool. Thanks for that. Any more thoughts on this? We're at time for this section. Any last thoughts? Awesome. Thank you for the contributions. Let's move to our next section. Feature flags, friends or foes. We have 25 minutes to discuss this. And this section is more focused on how can we leverage feature flags to be an aid for efficiency and not become an obstacle in the way. Do you use any special techniques or have you had any learnings in the past couple of months of rolling this out that you'd like to share with the team? And Miguel, you have our first point. Take it away.
Yeah, I want to say that they are friends. And I want to point out that they have become easier to use in the past few months. We have some the YAML files that indicate which team they belong to, who's the owner, the rollout issues. I think there are some friction points, at least for me. Slack is very inconvenient, especially because I forget the commands that I have to use. It's very easy to forget that we have to put -- staging, and then you have to be careful with that. So it's not a very fun experience to modify. But I think that's some things that we can work with to improve. I do think they become enemies when we have them stale for many iterations and nobody knows what they are anymore. We have the worst ones are the ones that are stale and default false. So like what happened with that? Like nobody will answer, and they were just an idea. So I think it's important to control the age of a feature flag, because once they get very old, they are definitely a sign that something went wrong. I guess the next person is Sarah.
Thanks, Miguel.
Yeah, I love feature flags. It's been really helpful for a lot of different projects. Like, I feel like feature flags are so important for our stages for a couple different reasons, right? Like, it's helpful just to have chat ops so that if something breaks, we don't have to worry about getting like a hot patch out there, how long it's going to take to roll everything out, like, which is, I mean, an obvious sort of baseline statement about them, but it has come in handy where it's like, that's very broken. Okay, now I turned it off without sort of having to deal with any other parts about it. It's also been really helpful that, like, I know GitLab has, like, we have this ideal that we're shipping all the time and we're shipping things incrementally, but I think with our stages, we're starting to hit the like ends of that philosophy. And one of those can be sort of replacing things or reworking things. So like, I've been working for a number of months now on basically a recreation of our pipeline graph because of many reasons. It was brittle in many different ways. It has just sort of outgrown what it was for. And it got to the point that like adding features to the graph was very hard. So we're like, well, we need to redo this, but you can't redo the pipeline graph and roll it out incrementally, right? You can't be like, okay, guys, we took away your whole pipeline graph and now you have one job and we're going to build it all up again. Like, you just can't do that. And so being able to use the feature flag for that has been also super helpful. And one tip about that approach that we've come to is using async loading with the feature flags has been really important, because since we're essentially building a second pipeline graph in the same path as the first pipeline graph, we don't want everyone loading the code they can't see. So in our like bundle file, we've been using the async loading with the feature flags so that we're never loading the code you can't use if you can't use that code, which I think is a pretty good tip for it. The one downside is with tests, I think, which is that RSpec tests default to the flags being on. View unit tests, you have to inject the flag, which isn't inherently terrible, but it's a like small friction point that you're like, great, I have to go fix this. And it's not really clear in RSpec tests. Like, something I'm working on now is trying to figure out how to like you just have to double your tests to make sure you're covering both the paths while you roll it out, you know? And like, I think in cases that aren't like such a big feature, it's much less of a big deal, but I suspect we'll find more cases where we want to rewrite bigger things coming up. And so like, these kinds of questions will become a little bit more important.
Thanks, Sarah. So two things. Thank you so much for that. I added a little to-do for you to please, after this call, not during, add a link to an MR that does exactly that so that we can all have a reference of asynchronous loading the code, depending on a feature flag. The other is about the thing you just said about covering both paths. One of the things that I can share that really bit us in the past was when we were developing features that were interdependent. And in this particular case was batch loading the diffs that Justin was working on. And then Thomas was working on not loading the inline and parallel data at once. We'd only load the one we needed. And then when we switch, we will go to the next one. They're not obviously related, but they're dealing with the same part of the code base. They're still dealing with the same part of the logic of the merge across app. So what we did was we had two feature flags for that, which is great, but then they compounded. So now we had to cover scenario for batch diffs on, batch diffs off. And then for each of these, inline and parallel split on and off. This was a mess rolling out. And even though they were thought about doing them separately, they ended up being rolled out at the very same time. So what we started doing now, which was something that Justin worked on recently, was the refactoring of the merge request page to not use tables and use CSS grid. When that was being developed, another feature was being added to the code base. And instead of adding that feature to the both paths, we made a decision, sort of an executive decision, to make this new feature will only be available if we're using the CSS grid, period. And the product was aware of that if this is rolled back or we disable this feature flag, then that feature will not be available. Good news, rollout was great. Everything got enabled at the same time, but we didn't have to worry about the compounding paths of the feature flags.
And that reminds me of one other note. I just wanted to add that because of the feature flag too, we actually have just duplicated some code. We ended up leaning into, you know, like there's some code where, okay, I can inject whether we're using the GraphQL or the REST endpoint and know that, so that like, because you have to look up data slightly differently. There's like a whole other talk I will do someday on how we did this. But one of the things we did do was, to a certain extent, we just duplicated files. And I was sort of loath to do that at first. I remember having a whole conversation with Peyton where he was like, just duplicate things. And I was like, no, we cannot do it. And like the answer was, 3 layers of those files are just duplicated and they'll get deleted when they're done, and all their specs will get deleted when they're done. But we didn't have to like think of the combinatorialness of it by just saying, fine, there's 2 and we'll delete them.
Cool. Thanks, Sarah. So moving on, one of the frustrations I have with chat ops that I wanted to share here in case anybody has any tips is that by the usual rollout process, we have to enable it in staging first, and then in specific projects in production, and then go for everything, all projects on gitlab.com. And this is a step that I don't have a particularly good option, a good solution for, where you have enabled for GitLab.com, GitLab or GitLab project, and GitLab.com, www.gitlab.com project. Now I want to go from that to actors to no actors and enable for everyone. The only way of doing this I know is disabling it for everything and then re-enabling it. Is there any other way?
You can just enable the feature flag for everything, even with the actors, and it will precede the one for everything. And yeah.
But I've
the
tried
only
that.
problem with that,
Yeah.
the only problem with that, and because I talked with that with Camille, is that if you do that and you do a rollback, so like let's say you disable it and you just say disable, then the actor will take precedence over the whole disable. So then you're only disabling it. So like if the one you specified before, let's say, oh, GitLab.com is on, and then it's on for this user, and then it's on for everybody, and then say it's just off for everybody, it will still be on for GitLab.com and the actors. So you have to disable all of them one at a time. So that's
Jose, so what you're saying is that by running the command to enable it without any actors works globally?
Yes. If you already have actors predefined and you enable it for all, it will work for everyone. But there is a caveat that Fred mentioned.
Great, that's good to know, but I could swear that I tried it and it didn't work. I'll revisit that. No need to linger here. Thanks for that. Oh, wait. I'm putting this on the wrong point. Thank you so much. Jose, enabling it for all should work. Fred said, rolling back will keep the actors on. Okay, moving on to my next.
Sorry, Andrew. Do we know if this is provided by our team, or is it a library that we use to create? It seems like all of this is kind of confusing. Let's say confusing to use. So can we improve that? Could it become an actual?
We can. The chat ops is something that we develop. I believe there's a project somewhere. I don't know. There's a project in GitLab. I can remember exactly what project it is. Yeah, gitlab.com/chatops. And that's the project that has, I guess, the code for everything. So Miguel asked, is this an internal project? Internal project. And yes, it is. Yeah, definitely feel free to go in there and see if you can open an issue for it.
Yeah, with the goal of opening issues to make it easier to use. I find it hard to use.
And that's fair. In usability, we
copy paste.
Yeah, we do too. In usability, we always say that if something is difficult to use, it's not on the person, it's on the system. So definitely open issues with suggestions to improve, Miguel. That's the best way to go ahead. Anything else to add, Miguel? I cut you off there, sorry. Good, awesome. My next point, which is something that we have been wrestling over the past couple of weeks on code review, is we're struggling with the always default to false part of the process, where yes, most often that's the case that we want to use, especially when we're rolling out features in pieces and steps. We don't want to make a default on. But sometimes, just sometimes, it makes sense to skip the overhead of rolling it out and having it enable on. Product has been pushing for this. We on the engineering side, we resist this because some of the times when product pushes us to skip levels, we have had regressions and we had to revert the code, which is never pleasant. But this seems like a good halfway solution where we have the, if we have the confidence that the code is well tested and it has been well tested, and we still want to have the assurance of turning it off if things go sour, it seems like a good way to go. Where I don't think it's a good approach is when we go for this reason because we're trying to rush something in to make the cut. That's a big no-no, big red flag, that if we're, the only reason why we're trying to default it to on is to rush things, make it default false. But I wanted to see, is there anything that you particularly go through in deciding the value of the default?
I mean, the last time we had that conversation, the general consensus was always false, no matter what. So we never avoid the rollout, to my biggest sadness in life. But it's, I think, because this also ties into the next point, so I'm kind of merging them together. But sometimes product is expecting a feature to roll out in a certain milestone, and the code will ship, but because it's defaulted to false, the rollout might take longer than the milestone limit, right? So like the code is done, but then it's still off. So like they can't do the release post, and that we felt the pressure in the last 2 milestone, at least in authoring, where it's like, well, why isn't it already why isn't it already on? It's like, well, we default to off and we roll it out, so you can't make a release post about it because it's not defaulted on. So that's where the friction comes from. And sometimes, again, it's like, is it like a rush and we should just distance ourselves from what product wants in terms of release, and they should just do the post when it's done and it's on? Or are there instances where it's safe to just turn it on and say, well, there you go, this is done?
Yeah, what I can add there, and this is more for Sam, for the engineering manager role, is to negotiate with product manager to prepare the feature block ahead of time, and then just put it on hold, get the technical writing approval, and then we will merge it when it's ready. And that push makes sense from their perspective, but I think we as EMs and ICs have to start thinking about iteration in a giving time for the rollout. If it's too large, if a deliverable is too large to put in a milestone and still fit the rollout after the merge, we have to cut it down into shorter steps. And that starts in the planning stage. So I understand product's frustration. We have to be aware and empathetic to them that they're trying to ship something to customer and they announce it on the kickoff. All of a sudden, it's merged 2 days before the freeze, not the freeze, but the end of the milestone. And all of a sudden the customers won't get it because we have to do the rollout. That creates pain for them. And it creates this thing that the engineer developed the feature. Why is it not done? Why is it not visible? So we have to find a middle ground here, which is cut it smaller steps, make sure that you account for the rollout. The one thing that I would say is that sometimes features are by themselves opt-in, which was one of the examples. The file-by-file mode of review in merge requests was stuck in user preferences, right? So the users had to go there to enable it. That didn't make sense to put default false. If we knew that the feature was working and incomplete, the risk was minimal. Hey, it broke something, go there and disable it, right? In those particular cases, it's totally fair to advocate for default on. That's our experience.
I feel like, I'm curious what other people think about this, but I feel like this is just sort of a tension between like what GitLab theoretically wants sometimes and like the actual physical limits of the universe. Like when you're in a level, like when you're in a very mature stage, sometimes even things that seem small are big. And like, I think there's like, I think like cut it down is a good plan when it can happen, but I also feel like a lot of times in our stage, we talk to the PMs as well about just sort of accepting where the stage is. And that like, sometimes that means that something is gonna be made in one milestone and it's gonna spend a milestone on .com and default off. And like, you're really just gonna announce it the next milestone and like, no one's gonna die. And like, that's just sort of how it is, right? Like, I feel like it's that tension there where like, I'm not uninterested in our company values, but I also am interested in where we have maybe outgrown them, and having a plan that honors both of the intentions, but like also admits to how things are working is sometimes helpful.
Got it. Thanks. Peyton, do you want to add something? You have the link here.
Yeah. So we had like a regression not too long ago with one of our backend engineers that kind of went through like Stan Hugh and a few different things. And then so like we had some things in the docs that were put that say, hey, let's always default to false. And I think that's a good idea for safety, because with lovable stages, like the last thing we want to do is like let our customers see a bug. And like, you know, there's different use cases, like you said, where we may want to default to true, but it's like one of those things where if I feel like I'm going to default to true, I might not even use the feature flag, you know, and just do a lot of testing for that. But if it's like really customer impacting, I would like to always default to false for these reasons, because like we've had it come back and bite us in the butt in the past. And like the cost of like implementing that feature flag with off is like a low cost to like actually having that regression or that bug and having to go through the headache of like rolling back or, you know, that process.
Yeah, I don't completely disagree, but I think the value of having an option to still turn it off in case something sudden and unexpected happens is worthwhile shipping it with the feature flag there, even if you default to on. We've had a situation in the past where we were able to mitigate a S1 P1 in 40 minutes because the feature flag was in. Otherwise, we'd have to wait for a deploy. And the customers were very upset. But during those 40 minutes, then they mitigated. Any more thoughts?
Yeah, so it was defaulted off, defaulted on, and then the S1 and P1 was then found.
Sorry, no. In that case, it wasn't default to on. It was a regular rollout of the feature. And then after months of the feature being online, 2 months, I think, was the repository browser. And then the customers had branches with hashes in them, in octothorpes. And that broke the app, the Vue app. And the fact that we still had the HAML implementation in place allowed us to quickly toggle into the HAML implementation. And so what I'm saying is like the value of having a feature flag there is separate from what was default value. It's always
Right. Yeah, I can totally agree with that, because we actually ran into that like this milestone with something that's been in the code base probably like 3 or 4 months. And that feature flag, it wasn't a S1, but so we can like push a little easy fix, but having that value still in the code base would have been beneficial there. You know, it's kind of hard to say, like, I guess it really just depends on like the feature, like if we're going to default off or on. Like a lot of times I find that I just don't ship with the feature flag if it's going to be default to true. But, you know, in some cases like that, it can come back. It can help you in the long run.
Just wanted to quickly say that, you know, when we do ship something with default on, that's affecting on-prem customers, and we can't change their feature flags once they've installed the new version of GitLab. So default into true before it's tested on gitlab.com isn't as safe as it feels, even though that feature flag is there. We have to reach out to the customer and say, hey, I don't even know how we would do it. I've never done it before, but hey, you need to turn this feature flag off.
Yeah, you would have to go into the Rails console at that point and give the customer the feature flag name, and they'd have to go in the Rails console, do feature.disable and the feature flag name, which, you know, is kind of a quick fix, but it's a pain for on-prem customers that are, you know, running their own servers. Good call out.
I have a question that might lead to an unpopular opinion, but is because we now have rollout and we default feature to off, and we are in a more lovable stage, isn't it in a way encouraging us to build larger feature so that we don't do as many rollout, right? So like it kind of encourage rolling out a feature you know is more stable, so that you do one rollout when everything is looking good, instead of like one quick feature and iterating on that. Like it's more a question, it's not necessarily an opinion, but like I feel like with the rollout and all the steps and the time it takes, it's very tempting to then cram more features under that flag and under that rollout, and then like release that thing that should work. And then if it doesn't work, you can turn it off, instead of this is the first iteration, this milestone. And so I have to spend a week rolling it out. And then next milestone, I'm going to spend another week rolling it, another one out for V2 and then V3 and then V4. And then there we go. I have like a working version, and I had to do 4 rollout for this. So that might be something also that seems to contradict our values, but in terms of workflow and efficiency, it actually is better for an engineering perspective. So it's more like customer have to wait longer before they get something. But at the same time, we're leveraging the fact that we have now feature flags and that we are in a larger stage that might require us to spend more time before we can actually ship something that the customer will have value from, instead of like at least we've seen that in pipeline authoring, but like the pipeline visualization is a good example where we had something quickly done, and then we talked with like our staffs and distinguished engineer in CI, and it was like, well, you could ship it this way, but even though it works and like it has some value, because it doesn't support everything it should support, it's actually going to turn people off from using this feature. So like we developed behind the disable feature flag for a couple of milestones, and then we turn it on, and then it was working, like fully working. And then we had only one rollout and people could start using it. But I'm curious what other people think about that.
+1 here.
Yeah, I get your point. I don't think there's an easy answer to it. I think the bottom line is the low level of shame barrier in lovable product categories is harder. We tried having a low level of shame. We had the situation with the rollout of reviewers that everybody felt the pain, where we shipped something to production. We enabled, this was more about enabling it or not enabling it, but it's kind of the same thing about the default, which was a feature was known to have problems on the workflow. We enabled the reviewers without having the merge request navigation update count, right? And for a couple of weeks, people were missing reviews. We knew that this problem existed. We discussed it as a team, and the low level of shame pushed us to roll it out. And we knew that people would be frustrated with it, but we had to ship it early. And there's a saying that if you ship the feature and it doesn't embarrass you, you shipped it too late, right? So that did embarrass us a little bit, but we were working on the solution right after that. And we learned a ton on those first couple of days on that feature that helped us shape the feature that we now rolled out about having re-requesting a reviewer that field merged earlier. So time matters a lot about these sort of learnings, and the more we can learn, the quicker we can learn, the quicker we can iterate. So it's a fine balance that we're always going to have to fight. There's no really direct answers there, I guess, but cool. Any more thoughts, Sarah? No, you're writing down below, sorry. Any more thoughts on this point? Cool. Sam, you said read only. Can I skip it, or do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, well, I don't know what we're like for time on this section, but
1 minute.
The majority of 1 minute, then let's probably skip it. The majority of what I wanted to bring up was brought up in the previous question anyway.
Okay. Cool. Justin.
I think we covered most of this already. Just that there's a lot of moving parts when you roll out a feature flag, which might I think slows down the process necessarily. We could probably address that by giving some love to the chat ops to help automate a bunch of those processes.
Yeah, and it has been improving with the YAML based approach, right?
Yeah, very much.
Cool. One of the things that I learned by looking at one of the merge requests that Thomas shipped a couple days ago was that you can set the default enabled on the code to check the YAML. Mind blown. That was nice. All right. Do we have any more points on this section? We're at time, but
can we link to that, Emma? Because that sounds amazing.
I'll recover it. Oh, Thomas, you can do it if you remember that.
Maybe. I should note, I did not find that out. Someone was like, hey, you could use :YAML here instead of true false. And I was like, what?
That's how we all find out. I found out through you, someone else. That's how it works.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it.
Please, thanks. Right, moving on to section 2. Restarting the timer. Regressions, how to react efficiently. So we know how we should react to regressions. And we know that if it's something that we pushed and regressions take precedence over the work that we're doing, and that they're important to fix as quickly as possible. But how about in lovable product categories? How do we handle them? How do we prevent them? And how do we particularly address stuff that might be minor, but it's still very visible? So let's have a chat about that. Jose.
Yeah, I do have a lot to say about that because we're lovable. There's one concept in distributed systems called the 3 pillars of observability. One is logs, the other is traces, and the other is metrics. And because right now we have a lot of eyeballs looking at what all of the features that we do and ship, one of the things that we should always take into consideration when we have an issue, if it is a visual regression, we don't have like a very specific system of how to classify them and how to fix them. Like, what is the priority? Sometimes we say, hey, it's a different color that is not aligned with our design system. So we change it. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer because it's a small change. But what happens if everything is misaligned, or perhaps it goes even further and nothing shows up, nothing loads, not even an error message? That's when those 3 pillars come in, and we already do have a part of those pillars implemented. We have Sentry, we have Prometheus in the case of the new pipeline chart, and we have also site speed, and we have the LCP metrics that tell us, hey, how well our pages are doing in load times. So from my understanding, we should always take the context as well. And there's a couple of places that say there's 4 pillars instead of 3 pillars, and the 4th pillar is context. And in this case, because when you have a significant amount of logs and metrics going all over the place, you should probably take a look into those. Or if our LCP metric is high, we should look into why it's high. We should not let a feature go with an LCP metric that is high go long enough without attention. And I think that we should try to prioritize our work, especially on Lovable stages, on those pages which have metrics that kind of put an alert on us.
That's a good point. You can read your point out, Peyton.
Yeah. So like those visual regressions, like I remember when we were doing like some different OKRs where we were changing like some buttons and different things, and each one would have to be visually inspected with screenshots, and it was just such a pain. And like in GitLab UI, we have like visual screenshots, like so we have DOM dumps in the regular GitLab code base to use, just normal snapshots. But like if we had that in place, like some of those visual regressions would not happen. So that's like, I would love that. And another thing, like with those regressions, like this is super inefficient, but like if we had manual QA testers, like that would be like so great. Like I could just ship something and hey, you test the heck out of it and let me know if anything's broken. But I know we're more in an automated world now. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, Peyton, because I think we've worked on places where we do have those teams. Other companies use them, and I think it's important to approach that, because at GitLab, the reason why we don't is not so much because we have automated. It's mostly because the having of if you had a manual team to do that, psychologically, it would kind of offload to them the responsibility of checking those things. And at GitLab, from the very start, we've thought of quality as everyone's responsibility. So we do want to have co-ownership of quality with that. And we're all on board with it. But I still share your perspective that automated visual testing with screenshots would definitely help. I was trying to recover one of the projects that Tim developed, which is a small tool that we can use for those kinds of efforts. I can't remember the name of that, but it's somewhere. Screener. No, what does anybody remember the name of that project? It's basically you run screenshots on master, then you run screenshots on your branch, and it kind of give you the different. Is it Screener? Yes, GitLab Screener. I'm putting the link on the agenda. Right. Where are we? Okay, this is here, and I'm going to put the link there. So that's something that might be useful for anyone doing wide efforts, because we've seen a couple of visual regressions through those very worthwhile, very valuable efforts of cleaning the code base regarding buttons, moving things to GitLab UI. They did have some side effects, and side effects in Lovable product areas are a little bit more visible and severe than others. Those tools will catch it. So I think it's important to bring awareness to that. While we don't have the automated visual screenshot testing, we might get by with using GitLab Screener for a while.
And another point that like, so I tend to like, my personality is ship fast, fast, fast. And I've had some regressions like in the past. And I think a lot of that relates to shipping so fast, fast, fast. Like, yeah, we want to ship fast, but like a lot of times as engineers, like we need to like slow down and like you said, not like try to offload any of the testing to like the reviewers, or if we had a manual QA team, and just like really like sit and think about like all the use cases. Cause like in CI, like especially like you could change a line of code that you think looks good right here, but you forgot about the 6 or 7 other places throughout the code base in the product that may have been touched from that. So I think like slowing down can like help a lot of those regression, or prevent a lot of those regressions.
Cool, thanks. Miguel, want to bring up your point?
I had a point before that.
So yeah,
Oh,
let's
go
go
ahead,
to Sarah.
I just wanted to point out that we're actually adding visual tests for the pipeline rollout now, specifically because it's not just that like in general that it's helpful. It's really helpful any place where you have the like combinatoric level of the pipelines, right? Like it's not actually possible for any human being who wants to get their work done to test every possible pipeline setup you could have in terms of jobs and dark mode and combinations and stuff. So it is coming. We can report back when it actually happens, but it's part of the plan for the big pipeline.
So, and that's in the product, right? If a new feature in the product that we will have that, or is in the RCI infrastructure, in our CI tests, we're going to have a job for it.
Yes, the goal right now is working to get it so that we can have a manual job for it in
Okay.
our CI tests, because I don't want it to be a problem for anybody who's not working on this very specific thing, but I
Sure.
do want people who are changing the CSS on pipelines to have like some confidence that they're not breaking things, because they definitely are. And like we should know what they are.
Okay, please report back. This sounds very interesting. In a related effort that we're having regarding transient bugs, which we'll talk eventually, we're talking about how can we help developers prepare their local environments for particular scenarios. Like, for example, how do I prepare a project that has different kinds of MRs with different kinds of pipelines? In our particular case, we have a bunch of combinations regarding project settings, squash on merge, fast forward merge, in all situations. And all of that takes a lot of time to replicate locally. And when you send it to review, the reviewer doesn't have that at all. So it's hard to replicate. So we're talking about that too. So let's keep sharing if we have any progress there.
Yeah, and Fred has been making a generator for us for pipelines. It's a little thing. We don't have to like stick around on it a lot, but it's good to know that like we've also been doing that. So we should have like a second summit about like auto generation or something.
Please. All right. Can we move on then? Miguel.
I've linked to the issue where we're working on that as well on Sarah's point a little further up. So if you want to have a look.
Perfect, Sam. Now, Miguel, go ahead. Sorry.
Cool. So yeah, I'm just looking at the RISE scoring method. I just opened it. I had no idea this existed, and I compare it with our triage model, and it looks like the RISE model, it's more sophisticated, at least at first glance. So it's possible we are ready to move to something better. I'm not sure who wrote the triage process. I don't mean to poop on them, but I think it's complicated enough that if we replace it with a RISE scoring method or something like that, I think it could be good for us, especially at the Lovable stages. So it could be something we could bring up to them. Say, hey, we're interested in looking into, for example, things like the audience we are impacting, because so that the severity is not just this very simple thing. So that could be like an action point there.
On that, Miguel, I would say that we don't call it RISE particularly explicitly, but we do have some sort of part of the RISE framework built into our triaging. So we do have that part that I showed you about the percentage of audience and stuff. So I think we do have some of it. What would be interesting to see is what are the things we're missing from the RISE framework and come up with suggestions for our quality team. And pinging Ramya or Mech would be a good person to ping on those issues that you create. But it's important to see what are we missing from the RISE framework that we could use. And Jose, since you worked with it, would be great to have your thoughts. But we already have parts of it. I would highlight that, even though we don't call it explicitly that. Make sense?
I would be curious to see if we are actually using the reach part of the severity when we apply a label, because to me it feels like it's more how angry are people, and then we just stick a label to it. And maybe it's just my perception, but I think we could use a more thorough and research approach, because the RISE score, what is good is that you're exposing the values of each of these categories, and then it generates the total score, and you can have a board which is sorted by score. And so it is no longer you can apply a special label on top of it and say like, right, this is breaking thing for specific customers. So even if the RISE score says it's like 50, then it should be like 200 just because of that. But like it's more fair in the sense that you might have a high RISE score and something that might seem tiny, but you're like, well, it's affecting everyone and it's a tiny issue, but like we might fix it faster than this new feature that adds this button, because like the RISE is lower on this new feature. And so it also resurfaces bug and technical debt a lot, where sometimes like only feature gets assigned priority, right? Like the RISE is for feature and bug. So like it kind of sorts itself out altogether.
Fred, are you aware of issue tracking systems that have RISE built in?
Jira had it, but it's like a plugin. And I mean, I don't think we're going to switch to Jira, just...
No, I'm saying
yes.
I'm saying we could. This could be an enterprise edition feature. This could be, unless I'm missing something and we already have it or something.
And Jira they have the option to have custom fields, so you could create a custom field, make it a RISE, then create subfield that would calculate the RISE, and then and then have like a table that sorts it through RISE, because you can sort by any value. So you can say sort by highest RISE, and then you would get your board. And that was pretty convenient to see.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure Glenn already has that in the roadmap sometime. I've seen that being discussed, custom fields and stuff, but we don't have a particular RISE score.
Yeah, the cheaper version of that is to have the GitLab bots calculate things for us. That could be like the boring solution to it, but it would not be a feature. Yeah.
Cool. I was trying to look, because one of the things that I've heard in the past. All right, I think I found it. So one of the changes that quality team is rolling out is, and this can be expanded to other areas, is that any bug that is labeled as merge request, UX, and bug gets automated bumped severity. So what they're looking at is exactly building in this lovable factor into the triage automatically in the triaging of the bugs. And I'm going to put a link to one of the issues that we're talking about here. Where are we? I'm sorry, trying to find myself here. Yeah, found it. So there, that's the link. And Mac, the idea is that quality is changing triage automated severity to consider certain parts of the products and bump up severity. That's kind of like the summary. This might make sense for our parts of Verify to do the same thing. So reach out to Mech if you feel like there's something.
Are we confusing severity and priority here? Because I do this all the time. Like the severity shouldn't get higher because something's more important. It's just as severe, right? It's just higher priority.
You are absolutely correct. So yeah, we had that discussion on Tuesday, and I still mixed it up. Yeah, what's raised, what's defined as a minimum priority is the priority, not the severity. The severity is still the same category, but severity 3 or severity. So on that board, what you'll see, and for the sake of the people watching the video, I'll just share my screen really quick. There we go. So the merge request bug severity is 1, 2, 3, 4. Severity 2 will automatically be as a minimum priority 1. So this means if there's an S2 reported, potentially that will be disruptive to the current work, because priority 1 is supposed to be drop everything and address that. Severity 3 goes to priority 2. Those would usually end up in the backlog. So this is already a good improvement. And then severity 4 goes to priority 3. So it's trying to make these bugs a little bit different in this area. So this little label could be replaced by something on the verify area. So keep that in mind.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Of course you
Sorry, I
can.
interrupted. So do you find that sometimes the UX team labels things as bugs that are in fact feature requests? And do you think that that is going to affect the way that this is going? Because I feel like sometimes they're just like, you're not fixing the thing I want to fix.
That's a fantastic question, Sarah. That's first, I could write a book on that question, but I won't. So I'll just give you the TLDR. UX bugs. So we addressed this on the transient bugs working group. And the fact is, what we consider bugs is code that is working with a defect. In terms of user experience bugs, is user expectations that are not being fulfilled. And they're both bugs. They're just different kind of category of bugs. One is UX bugs, the other is engineering bugs. The way we solved it on transient bugs working group is that UX bugs are bugs. And the perspective is that some of the things that we weren't building, so for example, that everybody knows what I'm talking about. When we update the status of the merge request by merging or by closing, there's a bunch of places in the page that doesn't get updated. Now, is that a bug? So we never wrote code to fix it. So we didn't have an engineering bug, but the experience felt like a bug. It was a broken feature. So what that meant was we labeled it as a bug, we labeled it as a transient bug, and we shipped it in the previous milestone. So to your question, the fact that they label it as user experience bugs might not be technically true for us, but the end result is that they'll be considered as such, which might make us develop a new feature, and the end goal is positive. So the end result is positive. Does that convince you?
No, but it's okay. It was a very valiant effort. I think I have seen things that sometimes aren't like, I think your example was a very good example. There are other things sometimes where it's like, I think the MR button might be one that many people on Verify are familiar with. The like, is this thing mergeable? And like, or the pipeline widget, like what's the code you can have? And people are coming to you being like, this is a bug. And you're like, well, it works the way it was designed to work. We should fix it. And that should be important, but it's not actually like a bug that everyone is ignoring because they hate you. You know what I mean? Like, it's like this sort of feeling of like, that's a feature that we should do, but it's still a feature. Because I think there's a certain way about when people talk about UX bugs that like, there's like this implication that it's because you didn't build the thing right, when that's not necessarily the case, right? Where it's like, we did not foresee this, so we should fix it. But I'm always a little leery of that. But yeah.
I would tell this to wrap it up, because we have to move on, is that's where the humans in the process come into play. And I've had cases where we had discussions, and the three of us, all the managers, product manager, backend manager, frontend manager, we were kind of like, I don't know if this is a bug. And then we decided on handling it regardless of whether it was a bug. We scheduled it as a feature, but it had the label bug, but we treat it as a new feature. So don't take the labels literally and have that feed into the process of scheduling things into the milestone, but don't get too hung up on what the semantics of it is, because we're always able to overrule things for either way. Postpone it, not postpone it. And if things get in the way because of metrics, change the label. As long as everybody's okay. Not everybody, we don't reach consensus, but you know what I mean, I think. All right. Right, I think we're done. Anything anybody wants to say in 10 seconds about regressions? Then we're moving on. Section 3, preemptive action. We have 20 minutes to discuss this. Let's see where we are. All right, then we'll be, all right, we're already kind of like tight, but let's do it. Preemptive action. What are the approaches you use while developing or planning your features to ensure a reliable delivery free of bugs? Anything around leveraging instrumentation and testing to ensure we catch production bugs as early as possible. Sarah has a lot to say here, so take it away.
I'm sorry I'm talking so much. I will try to say it as fast as I can and then hear what everyone else is doing too. So for me, I feel like we try to start from like the very basis of it, like that you can't have availability if you don't have good structure in your code, because the messier your code is, the more stuff you're just going to break, right? Like I think we all know and agree about that. And so I think we have been trying to find ways to keep the code less breakable. Some of that is with CSS. Utility classes is like such a core. So much of the pipeline graphs fragility and its CSS fragility is that like, it's very old style nested CSS that I think made sense when it was built, but it means that a little change has cascading effects. So I think focusing on using utility CSS whenever possible helps. Same with like data driven in like an architectural sense, not in a like what do the metrics say sense. Don't put magic numbers into things, but read stuff off the DOM. That was another big problem with the pipeline graph. Lots of magic numbers that made sense once, but now like part of our rewrite is like, let the browser lay it out because it's good at laying things out, and then look up the number off the browser and like make that programmatic and let the data drive how the rest of it's going to work. Small components with as little intermingling as possible, right? We all know that. We've been using more higher order components. So if we have two graphs that need to be somewhat the same, or we have a feature that we really like drawing the links, we can put that in a higher order component, which helps because then things are just in one place. And then now for the graph itself, we're like sort of undertaking like a whole suite of preemptive actions as we roll it out. And I'm not really sure which are going to be the best, but we are adding a whole bunch of sentry calls. And because Sentry doesn't have source maps, adding sentry calls means making sure we add the component name so you know where the error came from when it finally happens. For that, we've been also leveraging two important things. View Apollo has nice error handling. View itself has like an error captured method that you can use. And then we actually have an errors pattern in PA that we've been using a lot for how we capture and bubble up our errors to the wrapper. And that's helping us with Sentry because we have very clear places where we can put those interventions because we have a known pattern. And then we're also adding some Prometheus calls to check the performance. Drawing the links is new and different. We can only know so much about the graphs. So we've been working with the backend to just add an endpoint where we can just send some link rendering performance metrics. So we'll see how helpful that is in helping us understand what's going on with the links in the graph. And then, what else do I have to say? Yeah, visual tests we talked about. And tests in general are sort of like, how do we preemptively solve this? I think are a double-edged sword. Like they're really great, but they take a long time to write. And no one wants to delete them and we don't need them anymore. No one wants to say, I think we don't need this test because it's not testing what we need it to do. But then managing those and updating those takes a lot of time. So they're great, but I have concerns. And sorry, yes, PA is pipeline authoring.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to bring it back to Thomas because he has a point on your data-driven in the architectural sense and reading things off the DOM. Thomas.
Yeah, so I kind of want to know more about that, if that's something that you apply sort of as general rule or more like only when you're trying to pull, like say the width of elements that have been rendered or something. My take has been for many years that the DOM is an artifact of the software. It's how we display the software. It's never like the thing we read from to get information for our software. So like, do you apply that, like read things from the DOM sort of across the board, or is it more limited in when you apply that sort of rule? Or
I do a lot of drawing code is what I've ended up doing a lot of. So for us, it's been things like width, but like I think of the DOM, it's not just an artifact, right? It's our runtime. It's your Java, it's your JVM, it's your whatever. Like the browser actually does a lot for us and it does it really quickly. And so I think to the extent that like, if the browser knows something you want to know, then sometimes getting it from the browser rather than recalculating it yourself, especially if you're calculating stuff, is really helpful.
Can you give an example, Sarah, a practical example that springs to mind?
Yeah, so for the pipeline graph, we're drawing the links and it's like, where do the links go? Well, first we have to draw all the jobs. Who's really good at drawing the jobs? The DOM is really good at drawing the jobs. The browser is very fast. It knows. It will give me the number then. So then we basically draw the jobs, read their location, and then we can draw the links based on what their real location is. And it's great because then you don't have to write code that is listening for a resize, right? Because if it resize, like none of that matters because the DOM tells you where the thing is, and if it changes, then like it will just cascade and tell you there's a new location, stuff like that.
I think I can add on that, like for this specific example, like we can see of like how it used to be done, where you would have CSS with like R value, right? So like you want to do a line between two jobs, and so you say, okay, I'm assuming the column width is always the same, so I'm gonna move 30 pixel down, then 40 pixel on the right, and then 30 pixel up, and then I have a link. But then that means that anyone that changes anything in the graph breaks the link, right? Because then these value changes. And so if you read from the DOM, you can go, what is the current width of this column? And like I can use a percentage base value to determine like how far the line should go. And so like these will never break because they're relative values that you read from the DOM. So I think that's in this instance why, for example, it's a good idea to read from the DOM.
So that works a lot like for graph drawing, but how could like, what about like another use case? Could you think of one of those?
From reading off the DOM, less so, but more the point that like, if you're ever calculating something yourself, you should see if something else already has that data, right? That like where things go, how they get laid out should be driven from what data you have versus adding things in. I might be able to come up with a better example, but I think I don't want to take up this time doing that right now, but we should circle back and I'd be happy to see if I can explain it better.
So like to just so I can wrap my head around it. So you're talking in like terms of like document query selector, select this element, get its like height and width properties like actually off the DOM node, and then using that value rather than trying to fumble together some CSS.
Yes, if what you want to know is its height and width, you should just ask the DOM. And likewise, other things that like, you know, we shouldn't be recalculating data. The merge widget meeting we had today, where the backend is going to do it and we can sort of provide that information, but we shouldn't be recalculating it. That to me would be like making it data driven again by like reading in what we need as opposed to adding to it ourselves when we can, because it makes it less code and less fragile.
Okay. Careful with the reflows though. Measuring elements is expensive. But anyway, thank you so much. Food for thought. I'll move on for the sake of time for Frederick. You have a point there. Go ahead.
Yeah, so basically one of my pain point that I've had in like a lot of new feature is that when it's time to write the RSpec or the end-to-end test, I am less competent in Ruby than I am in JavaScript. And so usually how we've been doing is, I mean, when I was in CI, it was more you write the spec and then the Q engineer comes after you. In PA, we didn't have a set, so that's going to change soon, but we didn't have a Q engineer to help us with the RSpec. But like one way to be more preemptive about issue obviously is to write good testing in both RSpec and end-to-end tests. And historically, we didn't get a lot of help writing them. So as a front end, we end up writing all the feature spec. And so just having more availability from Q engineer. And I think in the past, it's been a resource problem more than anything. So like we don't have enough Q engineer to really help us write the test. So they usually come after and like give tips on like how you could improve them. But it would be much better if we could have like a actual dedicated issue to implement these tests and like make sure we cover every use case we think we need to with end-to-end tests and not break the platform.
Awesome. Thoughts? Anybody?
Yeah, I can say yes. I also find it painful to write Ruby. I don't think I've had to write anything in QA, so I think this is very well managed by the QA team itself. But the feature specs are something that when they come up, it's very slow for me. It's not an efficient way to spend my time. And I wish we had some more support, part of the process that involves more support from QA. And I don't think, I think that we could make an exception for front end because we don't know Ruby as backend does. So we might have to protest a bit more about how we can get the help from QA to front end to do the changes we need.
So on that note, Miguel, I wish Samantha was here. So I had the same conversation when Samantha joined, and she wasn't very comfortable with RSpec. She did a journey of like learning, getting more comfortable with that, and that came through collaboration with backend directly, reaching out to colleagues, reaching out to counterparts to ask for help, and over time she became much more resilient. Because I don't think we should focus so much on the Ruby, because they do fulfill different goals, the tests, and they do help us a lot. So especially when you're doing refactors, you want to make sure that you have a strong test coverage, not just on the code, but also on the feature side, so to make sure that we don't break any expectations from the feature side, even though the code was rewritten. So I think they are valuable being a front-end responsibility, but like our collaboration value is strong. And if you're feeling slower or just slower than usual, I don't think there's anything wrong with reaching out to back-end collaboration and basically even schedule time for that.
I guess what I'm saying is I wish it was more part of the process of development than something ad hoc where I have to reach out every time I'm confused. It could be a training for all the front-end engineers. We have a training on RSpec and the way RSpec works, but at least we have a process for that instead of suffering through MR after MR. Maybe somebody will have time to help us sometimes, or maybe not, and then it will just be disorganized. So if we put it into the process, even if they say the process is we write it, then I would like to have more support from that side.
Justin, you want to share something?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point around how people will tend to do the thing that is easy for them and that they're good at. And I feel like some of our pain points in testing come from the narrow view of what we're comfortable with on the front end side. Like I know I've had a lot of pain points dealing with Rails and Ruby very recently, and it kind of structures our tests in a wrong direction. Whereas we could have one larger integration test that more accurately satisfies covering this particular feature or component, but we just don't do it because using Capybara is painful for us. And I totally agree that if there was some built-in support mechanism to encourage that part of the process, it would help a ton. I don't know if that's an additional reviewer, like a test reviewer. I hate to add more process and steps to an already large process, but it's definitely a problem.
I think there's a flip side to that though, which is that Capybara tests take a lot longer to run than unit tests. Like literally the test file for the pipeline is 1,200 lines of Capybara, which is easily 1,000 lines too many. Like we spend so much pipeline time running those. So I agree that sometimes we should be writing them, but I think I agree with everyone that having more of a framework would be helpful in helping people make the right decisions around them. Also, our backend, I feel like, I don't know how it is with Create, but I feel like getting attention from our backend is incredibly hard. Like they're responsible for so much CI stuff and so much jobs and like the jobs tables and like so much stuff that the front end being like, can you help me write my Capybara test? They're just like, I have so many other things to do that's not that.
Yeah, totally agree. And at the risk of Sarah and I just taking over this whole call and ranting about testing, I think the problem with Capybara tests taking a long time to run is way less that it's a Capybara test and way more how we're writing those tests themselves. We have, and this is highly opinionated, this is totally my opinion, but I think we test a lot of the wrong things, and I think we test a lot of meaningless things way too much. So we chew up a bunch of cycles reiterating over things. Like I've refactored, I think, 2 tests in the last week where we had a before each respooling up a component that was a display only, no state change component, but it iterated over it. Oh, well, I'm going to test this one piece of it. Now I'm going to destroy the component, rebuild it, and test this other piece that was a static value. And I see that a lot. So yeah, it is more expensive to run it in the back end, but how expensive is engineering time to go back and fix a regression in production?
And on that, like definitely on that point, like I've seen that, and I have fought against it a lot. Like where some people will be, you should write in an end-to-end test, and what I'm being asked to do is like go and assert that the text is rendered, and I'm like, well, this is a waste of Capybara's capability, right? It's like I should assert functionality and making sure that the user can do the right thing, like the text and like the button is there. This is all unit test. It's faster. It's easier to maintain, and like. I think like the biggest problem with me, and I brought that up before in one of the CI meeting, but one thing that encouraged this to happen is that the front end is the last engineer to touch the feature before it's released. And so we have a rule that a feature has to release with end-to-end test. And so it makes sense then that the last merge request for the feature has the end-to-end test. And then therefore it's the front end that ends up doing it because they're just finishing the feature. But like in an ideal world, if there's a need for end-to-end test, there would be a separate MR that could release either in parallel or right after. And then once it's done, then you can turn on the flag in a separate MR and then it's out. But like making all of, and also like it can make the MR very big. And so you have to do different commits or different MR and then turn the flag. So why not just have someone who's way more competent tell the engineer, if we need a test, I will take care of it. What is this feature? Yes, we need a Capybara test. Here's what I'm going to do. Does that sound good? Yes, merge everything together. And then we have like a much better workflow. And that would also avoid bloating the end-to-end test because then people who write the test would write meaningful tests and not just like this copy is okay.
Okay, so let me just summarize one thing and then we can move on to you. I see two things here. One, the quad planning part of the process, which is supposed to have the SCTs, the software engineering test, come and help the deliverables when after they're assigned, help weigh in what is the needed strategy. And I heard that you have one recently. So if that's a recent thing, I would suggest Sam to reach out to them and making sure that they're aware that we're expecting that of them, like a little bit more guidance on the issues themselves, what are the sort of tests that this needs ahead of the development being made. The other is collaboration in terms of backend, because I feel like they don't have time to support you. I feel like that's something that we're worth discussing about why that is. And if that's the case, we might start making more sense to schedule issues that are apparently only front end, but they only have the label for front end, but they might need to start having some capacity of backend forecasted into it. Not just because of the tests, but just because if you're not having support at all. I've done cases where I've scheduled issues where I've assigned one of our front ends just to be there as a consultant to have time sketched out, prepared for that task. So Sam, that's basically two things for you.
I've got a list. It's all good.
Sorry, I interrupted someone.
That was me. I just wanted to mention that perhaps one of the things I agree with a lot of those points that perhaps we're not testing the right things. But there is another point that we have to take into consideration. That is the release team. The release team tends to use the end-to-end tests to be able to say, hey, this is a release that we're actually going to release to the general public. Because once a release is scheduled and you get all the omnibus images and all of the installers that we actually support, they actually look at the reports and say, hey, everything is working. Yes. Everything is rendering. Yes. Because before we actually had this kind of automation, we just had to do a checklist when the release management thing was like a on rotation process where every single engineer had to be a release manager once. So now that everything is automated, they had to make sure at least at least the most important features at Gitlab are actually working. So we do have to provide them a certain guarantee that what we're shipping is something they can actually release to the public.
Here comes the experience of Jose as a release manager in the past. Thanks, Jose.
3 times.
I have a quick hack that most probably won't like use because sometimes the features are too big, but a lot of times to be kind of sneaky, I guess. So I don't like writing Ruby tests, most don't. So a lot of times I'll pair up with the backend engineer on like a feature and we'll work off the same MR. And typically they are just happy because it's part of their work just to continue doing that on the same MR. But, you know, I do understand that doesn't work for all features, but I do that quite a bit.
Collaboration. All right, we need to move on. We're at time of this section. Anybody has the last minute, 10 seconds thing to say?
I have one. The SRE, we used to do an SRE shadow where the monitor engineers were shadowing the SRE team. I'm wondering if it could make sense to have a QA shadow where we chase around the QA engineer and learn everything there is to know from them about RSpec. It could be cool.
Right, training, shadowing, right, we got it. I feel like those are some good takeaways. Thanks, Miguel. Next section, I've brought it down to 5 minutes, so let's try to make it short to make it as end on time because we have a retrospective after this. Customers and users. What are some techniques we can use when the audience is so large that there are strong support for opposing alternatives? So it's not rare in Lovable stages that you have users clamoring for one solution that goes directly against the other solution that other users are asking for. Any techniques on dealing with users and customers' expectations in our stages? So Miguel.
My technique is to pass that all responsibility to the PM and let them deal with the users. But, it sounds like a joke, but I think it has some seriousness to it because I think that they are the ones that are detached from the product enough that they can see things sometimes more clearly than us. And I think that that's how if a user says something mean, they are not gonna take it personally because they're not as close as we are because we build the thing. So I think it's good to offload that to them. And then they can decide if they want to listen or not. I would rather not pay too much attention to it.
Yeah, Miguel, I agree. I understand that it is a responsibility of the product manager. The reason why I put this section here is because I think that we are making decisions as engineers on the ground every day. And just as an example, Phil was building the merge request navigation dropdown with accounts for the reviewed and the signed. And users were complaining about, oh, but now I have to click 2 times and I have to open this thing to get where I usually used to get to my assignees and stuff. And in that moment, without even any product manager involvement, there was a decision to have the top link of the dropdown have the href to the assignees list. Now, this is a decision in development that we make that affects how the users will use this feature. So that's why it's here. It's not necessarily so much the PM part of it, but it's also the decisions that we made on a daily basis that we know, we use the product, we know how these things affect it. So that's kind of accessibility, usability, all that sort of thing. Make sense?
Yeah, my boring answer is that we could involve the PM in those moments to explain to them. So we need good communication with them to explain to them what pros and cons and what is easy to make, what is the boring solution. But I don't want to feel too involved in deciding if users will love this or not, because I think that will cloud my work and it will make it more difficult for me to make the right engineering choices.
Okay. Food for thought, I guess. Thanks, Miguel. I'll just read my point very quickly. I would like everyone to think about getting it. We are in the driver's seat of a lot of stuff we do. We can contribute for things to be pushed into the radar of PMs to be scheduled. One of the examples was 5x-file. It was an engineering pushed feature that eventually turned out to be very useful for product as well. Some customers love it. And Thomas, just read it.
I'll summarize it real quick. I think our app, at least in the diff side and the MR side, we're trying to accomplish goals for like multiple types of users. And what that means right now is our code is like, well, the UI is kind of cluttered, but also the code is really cluttered because we're like, if this, go over and do this thing, otherwise do this thing. And I think it would be really useful to both us and our users to just like split those up into different modes. Like, hey, are you a single file modality person? Here's the single file app. You can just go do all this stuff over here. Are you the like, are you just different modes of users for our apps would be really interesting. Because that way users who really complain when we like change the height of an element, maybe that would never occur on the type of mode that they're using because they're never going to see that change, something like that.
That goes to our example of a file by file, non-file by file, but more tied to potential personas, that sort of thing. We've had content writers complain a few things that doesn't make sense for developers. Yeah, those are, and again, create the issues, create proposals. We've had great success of like starting with a merge request. One of the features that Phil shipped this milestone was something that he worked out of the deliverables in the last milestone, and hey, this would be really handy. I showed it to the PM and he went through and was scheduled. So it really helps. So take that driving seat and use it. All right, anything else? 10 minutes for customers, 10 seconds for customers and users. Anything there to add? All right, thank you so much. And the last section, I will shorten it from 5 to 4 minutes. Any other tips? Anything we haven't discussed? Anything that comes to mind? And be succinct if you can.
Yeah, I have one. I can't see the screen, so if anybody did anyone put an agenda point down? My monitor died over here. I didn't want to skip in front of anyone.
No, you go ahead. There's nothing in there. Speak.
Okay. So recently on CI, we've been working a lot with tech debt. So one of the things we've done is kind of evaluate a lot of our code space. And started creating technical debt issues. So we've got like 20, 30, whatever it is. And we're trying to spend some time on tackling those issues. So like, I think it's very valuable to assess your domain every now and then and create those technical debt issues and try to get them scheduled with your PM to make your life easier, like as an engineer, to maintain this code base, your test, and eventually it will allow you to ship things faster and easier and make our customers and product a lot happier.
Got it. Thanks, Peyton. Fred.
It's just to be reminded that, you know, sometimes we have weight that we can say to PM and our EM. And so sometimes being proactive with refactors, there are sections sometimes that you can see are going to be a problem as they grow, and just pushing for it to be scheduled and like trying to communicate how important it is for the future of the section. It's usually I've found no PM not listening to that. So if I go, this section needs to be redone so that we can keep having like an efficient code base, then they usually listen in. And so instead of waiting until someone gives you the permission, just ask for it, and you can get it easy.
100%, Fred. I'll just say that if it's a quick refactor doesn't even affect the delivery of the deliverable, you need to ask. But if it changes the delivery, always bring it up, create the issue, and push it for the reschedule the next milestone. I'm all for it, and I think Sam is too. Justin.
Or wait till they're distracted and just do it before they can stop you.
Yes. That can work too, I guess. Thanks, Sarah. Justin.
Real quick. So push for more decoupling of back end and front end. We've had a couple of issues where I've had a straight feature be denied because it wasn't physically capable. This is something out of our hands as a front end team, but we should push back a little harder to try and get the tools we need to do a smaller, simpler job.
Great point. Anything else? Yeah, GraphQL will save us all. All right, we're at time, everyone. We made it. Thank you so much. Hopefully this session was productive. It was for me. And thank you all for taking 1.5 hours of your time to discuss your tips and tricks. I'll upload it to YouTube. I'll share it on the channel. Sam will share it with you all as well. And have a wonderful Thursday. And I'll see you on the retrospective. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks all.